Whether you're a bioprocess engineer hunting for the perfect scaled-down model, a biotech founder architecting the leap to commercialization, or a scientific analyst who craves raw technical truth, you've reached the technical edge. In this space, we live by a single mantra: the process is the product. Welcome to the Biomanufacturing and Fermentation Technology podcast with Prasad Urnala. Hit subscribe and ring the bell to join a global community and stay at the vanguard of biotech translation. Let's build the bioindustrial future together.
Imagine for a moment that you're a pharmaceutical engineer. Not today, but say 50 years ago. Your job for the last century has basically been a kind of industrial cooking.
Right. You're over a beaker mixing chemicals.
Exactly. You're playing with temperature, with pressure, trying to force a reaction to happen. You're hunting for one single perfect molecule that, lowers blood pressure or kills a bacteria. It's chemistry. It's precise, but it's static.
It's dead matter. You're building a tool like a key. It doesn't change once you make it.
Right. But now, and this is why we're doing this deep dive today, the job description has totally changed. Based on all this research, if you're in this field, you're not just mixing chemicals, you're writing code. But the hardware isn't a silicon chip, it's a living cell. You are literally programming life.
It really is a fundamental paradigm shift. I mean, we're moving from an era of just discovery, where we wandered into a rainforest hoping to find a useful plant, to an era of engineered biological systems.
And that's a huge distinction.
It's massive. We aren't just taking what nature gives us. We are actively rewiring the operating system of microbes to do things nature never ever intended.
And that is exactly what we are unpacking today. We're diving into microbe-derived therapeutics. And looking at the literature, it really feels like the field is splitting into two very distinct paths.
It is. It's almost like two different business models for bacteria.
Yeah.
On one hand, you have the microbe as a factory. This is where we keep the bacteria in a giant steel tank. We use it to make a purified molecule, a protein, a drug, and then we pull that molecule out, bottle it, and the patient never even sees the microbe.
The bug is just the production line.
Exactly.
Okay, so that's the industrial side. But then there's the second category, which feels much more sci-fi to me.
The microbe is agent. This is where the engineered microbe is the drug. We're talking about live biotherapeutic products, or LBPs, bacteria that you actually swallow or inject, which then, wake up, sense what's going on in your body, perform computations, and do work inside of you.
It's the difference between a factory making a car and a tiny self-driving car. But here's the cold tension I found in the reading that was so fascinating. With a traditional drug, like an aspirin, success is all about potency.
Correct. Potency and selectivity. Does it hit the target?
Right, chemistry is about structure. But when you start engineering life, the metric for success completely changes. It becomes about reliability over time, and specifically genetic stability. Because a microbe is alive. It evolves, and if you ask it to do something hard, it is going to try to stop doing it.
That's the battle. Evolution is the antagonist in this story. It's the chaos we're trying to contain.
So our mission today is to unpack how we turn biology into these programmable systems and the huge engineering war we're fighting against evolution to make it all work. Let's start with the factory side, because I think there's this misconception that we just woke up one day, learned to edit DNA, and suddenly could make bacteria produce human drugs.
Yeah, the overnight success that took, 40 years? The sources really stress that this wasn't one breakthrough. It was a convergence of two totally different fields.
You had genetic engineering on one side.
Obviously. That gave us control over information flow DNA to RNA to protein. That's the software. But just writing the code isn't enough. You also needed fermentation engineering.
The hardware.
The hardware.
Yeah.
Figuring out how to keep billions of these cells alive in these enormous steel tanks, getting them just the right amount of oxygen and food to actually produce industrial amounts of product.
And the poster child for this whole thing, the moment it all became real, was insulin.
Recombinant human insulin. It's the modern exemplar. And it's so easy to forget how things were before. Do you know where diabetics got their insulin before this?
I'm guessing from animals.
Exactly, from the pancreases of slaughtered pigs and cows. It was a pretty gruesome industry.
Wow, which is not exactly efficient.
Not efficient at all, and not medically perfect either. Pig insulin is close to human insulin, but it's not identical. It caused allergic reactions. It was always a compromise. Then, scientists figured out how to insert the exact human insulin gene into E. coli or yeast.
And that proved microbes could be production platforms, not just germs we try to kill. But here's where it gets really interesting. The sources point out it's not just cut and paste the gene and walk away.
Not at all. The sources break this down into 3 different layers of capability you have to nail, all at the same time. They call it the factory logic.
And if any one of them fails, the whole factory just shuts down.
That's it.
Okay, let's walk through these. The first one is the genetic layer.
This is all about construct integrity. I mean, think about it from the cell's perspective. You are forcing this little bacterium to make a huge amount of a protein it doesn't need, insulin.
To the cell, it's just a waste of energy. It's like asking a factory worker to build cars all day, but also carry a 50-pound backpack of rocks just because.
Exactly. It's a massive metabolic burden. And because of that, there's this huge selection pressure. Nature hates waste. So if a random mutation happens, that breaks that insulin gene.
The cell becomes a slacker.
A very successful slacker. It has more energy than its neighbors, so it grows faster, it divides faster. And in a fermentation tank, pretty soon your whole factory is just overrun with these lazy mutants who aren't making your drug.
So that's the first battle keeping the code intact. Okay, layer 2 is the physiological layer. This sounds like it's about budgeting.
It is. The cell's internal economy. Every cell has a limited budget of carbon and energy ATP. If you just crank the production dial to 11, make more insulin, faster, you blow the budget.
You blow the fuse on the cell's energy grid?
You do. The whole system jams. Proteins don't fold right. Toxic byproducts build up. A lot of failures that look like bad gene design are actually just host physiology failures. You redline the engine.
And then layer 3, the process layer. This is where we leave the test tube and get into the real world. A tank the size of a building.
And in a tank that big, physics gets in the way. Conditions aren't uniform. You get oxygen gradients. The cells at the bottom might be suffocating while the ones at the top are fine.
It's like an apartment building where the penthouse has great AC and the basement is a sauna.
A little bit, yeah.
Yeah.
And that unevenness, that heterogeneity, drives evolutionary drift. You get these little subpopulations that start behaving differently because they live in different neighborhoods of the tank.
So it's managing all 3 at once: genetics, physiology, and process. Now, speaking of factories, we have to talk about yeast, not just bacteria.
Yes. Yeast is a powerhouse, especially for what they call complex natural products.
The example given was artemisinic acid, a precursor for malaria drugs. They have yeast making this at, 25 grams per liter. That's a huge number for anyone not in the field.
It's a massive yield. And the reason we use yeast for things like that is that yeast are eukaryotes. They're more complex, more like our own cells. They have organelles.
Internal rooms.
Exactly. Compartments. So if you're engineering a long chemical assembly line, sometimes step B uses a chemical that's toxic to step A. In a bacterium, it's all just one big soup. In yeast, you can put one reaction in the mitochondria and another one out in the cytosol.
It's like having a dedicated paint booth so the fumes don't mess with the assembly line.
Precisely. That spatial organization is something bacteria really struggle with.
So we have these incredible factories, but let me play devil's advocate. Why bother? I mean, we are really good at chemistry. Why bring in all the messiness of biology?
That is a great question. Why use a finicky living thing? It really comes down to complexity. Traditional small molecule drugs are great at fitting into small, well-defined pockets on a protein, like a key in a lock.
A simple mechanical fit.
Right. But a lot of disease targets aren't simple locks. They're huge, flat surfaces. Or they're these big assemblies of multiple proteins all coming together.
So a small molecule just bounces off.
Pretty much. It doesn't have enough surface area to grab on. It's like trying to stop a charging bull with a paperclip. But a biological molecule, like an antibody made by a microbe, is large. It can wrap around those complex targets.
Plus, some of these molecules are just impossible to build with chemistry.
Oh, absolutely. Nature is a way better chemist than we are. Some of these molecular scaffolds are so complex that a chemical synthesis would take, 50 steps, and you'd end up with a teaspoon of dust at the end. A microbe can do it in one go.
But there's a catch. The sources call it the folding envelope.
This is the speed limit of the factory. Just because you can give a bacterium the DNA for a complex antibody doesn't mean you actually get a working drug.
Expression is not equivalence. That was the line that stuck with me.
It's the golden rule. Antibodies have these incredibly complex 3D structures, with disulfide bonds holding them together just so. Bacteria often lack the sophisticated machinery to do that kind of complex origami. So you get the protein string, but it just folds into a useless clump.
An inclusion body.
Right. It's not a medicine. It's just garbage. It's like getting all the parts for a dresser from IKEA, but throwing away the instructions. You have all the pieces, but you don't have furniture.
So we're constantly pushing these systems to the very edge of what they can physically process. Okay, so that's the factory, using the bug to make the drug. Now let's pivot to the part that really captured my imagination, the agent, the living drug.
This is the frontier, live biotherapeutic products. Here, we're not just looking at production, we're looking at behavior. The sources break this down into an ultimate toolkit with 4 modules: sensing, computation, actuation, and containment.
Let's break those down because this is basically the instruction manual for a biological robot. Sensing seems pretty obvious.
Right, but think about the context. A pill dissolves everywhere, has no idea where it is. But a microbe has receptors. It can sense its environment. Is the pH low? Is there inflammation? Is it near a tumor?
So it has eyes, basically. Then comes computation. This is the part that blows my mind. We're talking about logic gates. Inside a cell.
Boolean logic. If this tumor marker is present and oxygen is low, then activate. It's integrating multiple signals to prevent the drug from firing in the wrong place.
And actuation is the firing mechanism, the action.
It could be secreting a drug, or it could be a behavior. One of the wildest ones is controlled lysis.
The suicide bomber approach.
Effectively, the bacteria grow to a certain density, a quorum, and then all at once they pop, releasing a huge payload of the drug right at the target.
And the last one is containment, the kill switch. We'll get back to that because that's a whole can of worms. But first, let's talk about a real-world application here, targeted delivery.
The best argument is toxicity. Think about cancer treatment. We often treat it systemically. We flood your whole body with a toxic drug and hope it kills the tumor before it kills you. It's carpet bombing.
And all the side effects, hair loss, nausea, that's just collateral damage.
Exactly. But an engineered microbe can change that. The example in the sources is using them for tumor delivery of checkpoint blockade nanobodies.
Break that down for us.
So tumors often have these low oxygen zones deep inside them. Your immune cells can't survive there. But some bacteria love low oxygen environments. So you engineer a probiotic, you swallow it, and it navigates your body, ignores healthy tissue, and colonizes that low oxygen core of the tumor.
It sets up base camp inside the cancer itself?
Precisely. And only when it gets there does it switch on actuation and start pumping out the drug. You get a super high concentration right where you need it and almost zero everywhere else.
So you turn a systemic poison into a local sniper shot.
That's the idea.
Yeah.
And you can apply the same logic to antibiotic resistance. Instead of a broad-spectrum antibiotic that nukes your whole gut microbiome.
Killing the good guys with the bad.
Right. You could engineer a microbe that only senses a specific pathogen, say a resistant staph infection. It could produce a toxin that only kills staph. Or, even smarter, it just outcompetes it. It eats all the food the pathogen needs to survive.
Ecological warfare.
You're using the rules of the jungle against the pathogen.
But, and this is a huge but, this brings us to the safety paradox. Because we're talking about putting genetically modified, self-replicating machines inside of people.
This is the core tension. The very things that make them powerful, that they replicate, they adapt, are the exact things that make them terrifying from a regulatory perspective.
And aspirin doesn't decide to evolve into a different drug halfway through my stomach.
Correct. A living therapeutic is not a static dose. And the biggest risk is that same old enemy, evolution. We talked about burden. If you engineer a safety switch, a kill switch, that switch costs the cell energy to maintain.
So the bacteria is actually incentivized to break the safety law.
That's the critical flaw. Designing a switch that works once is easy. Maintaining it over millions of generations is the hard part. The sources mention systems like dead man switches or passcode systems where the bug needs a special nutrient to survive. You stop taking the nutrient pill, the bug dies.
Sounds foolproof.
Until a random mutation allows a bug to survive without the passcode. That mutant has a massive survival advantage. It will take over the population in hours.
So safety engineering is evolutionary engineering.
It has to be. And that's incredibly difficult. Then you have the other clinical risks. Colonization. What if the bug sets up permanent shop in your gut? Or host variability. Your microbiome is a jungle. Mine's a desert. The drug might act totally differently in us.
And the scariest one, horizontal gene transfer.
The one that keeps regulators up at night. Bacteria love to swap genes like trading cards.
So what if your engineered microbe just hands its make cancer drug gene to a random E. coli that's already living in your gut?
That is the nightmare scenario. Suddenly, a common gut bug is armed with a biological weapon. Which is why the regulations are so intense. You can't just run standard toxicity tests. You need genetic monitoring of the drug while it is inside the patient to make sure it hasn't mutated.
It's a totally new level of surveillance. So looking forward, where does this all go? The sources talk about personalization and AI.
Personalization is the logical next step. If everyone's microbiome is unique, maybe we need custom-tailored microbes for each patient.
That sounds incredibly expensive.
It is, which is where AI comes in. And it's not just a buzzword here. It's a tool for the design, build, test, learn loop. The most valuable thing AI can do is help us predict stability.
Predict the mutiny before it happens.
Exactly. AI can look at a genetic circuit and say, this design will create too much metabolic drag and will break in 10 generations. But if you change this one codon, it'll last for 50. It helps us navigate that evolutionary landscape.
So it's moving us from what can we make to how do we control it?
That's the perfect summary. We're moving away from the idea that we can just force biology to do what we want.
Which seems to be the final synthesis here. The vision isn't microbes replacing all drugs. It's that they occupy a niche where we have to negotiate with evolution.
Negotiating with evolution. I love that. It's not a command, it's a conversation. And sometimes a very loud argument.
But if we win that argument,
We unlock medicines that can think, adapt, and go places no chemical ever could.
So, here's a thought to leave you with. We've spent this whole time talking about engineering the microbe to fit the human. We tweak its genes, we try to make it compatible with us. But as these therapies get more advanced, are we going to reach a point where we have to engineer the human to fit the cure?
What do you mean by that?
I mean, imagine a future where before you can take the life-saving living drug, you have to terraform your own gut. You have to take a pre-treatment that wipes out native competitors or creates the exact nutrient niche the drug needs to survive. Will we have to start gardening our own bodies just to make the medicine work?
That is a profound question, and honestly, I think the answer might be yes. We might have to become better hosts.
Something to chew on. Thanks for listening to this deep dive. See you next time.
Hi there, thank you for staying with me until the very end. If these technical insights help bridge the gap in your own process, please hit subscribe and make sure to hit the notification bell. Stay connected for our next deep dive into the realities of biomanufacturing. I am Prasad Ernala. Thanks for listening.